Hi there, welcome. Welcome to Homekeepers. Boy, am I glad to be with you today. We are kicking off a week that's just exciting and informative, and I hope you will not miss one day this week because I have one guest for the entire week. So you know that takes someone rather special. But before I tell you who that is, welcome. Welcome one and all to Homekeepers. You regular folks, you new folks, you will want to watch every day this week to be informed. I have a scripture that I'll be using every day this week. 1 Chronicles 12:32. The sons of Issachar understood the times with knowledge of what Israel should do. And this week we are talking with an expert who understands the times and as to what America should do. Her name is Brigitte Gabriel. Perhaps you've seen her on some of the major news networks in the United States and beyond, because she's been on the air in the Middle East as well. And I sat down and talked to her, and we kept talking and talking and talking until we had 5 programs ready for you. And I hope that you will just determine that you will watch every single day. The first program, we really talked a lot about her background and how God absolutely prepared her for what she's doing today. So before I show you those conversations, I want to offer you a book called Understanding Islam and Christianity, Made Easy. Now, be sure that you realize that this is not exactly what Brigitte is talking about. This is just some comparisons, but also one thing that drew me to it is in the back it has a full pullout of how you can really witness to the Muslims and Arabs and so forth. And we want everybody saved, don't we? Okay. So just that is available to you. Just write to me at box 6922, Clearwater, Florida 33758. If you can enclose an offering, oh my, how we need it. But if you really can't, I'll be glad to send you this book. But right now, I want you to meet Brigitte and listen to what she has to say, and you will be informed. Being ignorant is not a blessing. Be informed. Let's turn this nation around for God. Here's Brigitte. Well, Brigitte, welcome to Homekeepers. And I have watched you on national shows, you know, through the years, and I always got real upset because you weren't on long enough. And so I want to thank you in advance for agreeing to be my guest for a whole week. I really want to educate the Homekeepers viewers.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited and thrilled to be here with you.
Well, I've read your books. Besides being very interesting, you're an excellent writer.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this first one.
Okay.
And it's called Because They Hate, but what fascinated me the most was your childhood and how I believe God, from the very beginning, when you are born to a woman who's 54 years old, I've never heard of that, because there wasn't any of that in vitro or stuff.
That's right.
How God chose you and prepared you for what you're doing today. So what was your childhood like?
Well, I was born in Lebanon, which used to be a majority Christian country in the Middle East. We were open-minded, we were fair, we were tolerant, we were multicultural, we prided ourselves on our multiculturalism. We had open border policy. We welcomed everyone to come into our country to live and study, because we wanted to share with them the westernization which we had created in the heart of the Middle East. Muslims used to send their children to study in our universities. They graduated and worked in our economy because we had the best economy
Is it like
in
America
the Middle East.
In many ways?
Lebanon is a republic exactly like the United States, actually. Most people don't realize that. Only Lebanon and Israel are the two republics, democratic states in the Middle East. One is a Christian country, used to be majority Christian country, Lebanon, and Israel as a Jewish state. But all that began to change, specifically in Lebanon, as the Muslims became the majority. within 30 years after we got our independence, they became the majority and we Christians became the minority, because we Christians got married, you know, until death do us part. We have maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 children by a stretch. From the time our kids are born, we're thinking about what education we're going to give them, what type of home we're going to raise them in. The Muslims, on the other hand, can marry up to 4 wives, multiple wives, and they have a lot of children. Just look at Osama bin Laden, the most famous Muslim in the world today. He is 1 out of 53 children.
Oh, my word.
He himself has 28 children. Most people don't know that. So in Lebanon, that's what really tipped the scale. That's really what gave the Islamists the power and drive to figure out, we've got majority in the country now, we can start attacking the democracy.
Well, your dad was successful, Christian home. You really celebrated Easter and Christmas. And you said the vegetation stuff around your home, that you really grew up in the Garden of Eden.
We did. I was raised in such a blessed home. I came late into my parents' life, like you mentioned earlier. My parents were married for over 22 years. They could not have any children. My mother was 55 when I was born, and my father was 60. So I was truly, it was like Abraham and Sarah, I was truly a miracle in their lives. So by the time I was born, my daddy was, you know, retired. He took his money in retirement from the government and opened up a restaurant and built like a real estate compound. So we had renters, and he loved gardening. So we had like the Garden of Eden. We had almost every tree you can think of that grows in our part of the world, in the Mediterranean. My mommy worked with my dad in the restaurant, and I had their full undivided attention.
Oh, they adored you, according to your book.
They adored me. They used to tell me, we love you higher than the skies, deeper than the oceans, and bigger than the whole wide world. And they told me that in the morning when I woke up, at night when they tucked me into sleep, and they sprinkled that a few times throughout the day. As would be sitting, or, you know, them just enjoying me in their lives.
Yeah, now is Lebanon still considered a democratic?
Well, the political structure is still a republic. It is still a democratic society. And the problem right now is that Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, who are Shiite Muslims, who marry multiple wives, who have a lot of children, have literally multiplied themselves to the point where now they have over 25% of the parliament seats in the government. And it doesn't take many generations when you got married, you know, up to 4 wives and have, you know, 7, 10 kids out of each wife. The demographics change so fast that democratically they were able to elect themselves to the government. So now, even though we still have the structure where the president has to be a Christian, the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, the cabinets, you know, has to be Shiites, the Secretary of State has to be Shiites, but the Islamists in general have the majority in the government right now.
You know, I was in Lebanon, I think it was about 1973 or so.
Oh, the good days, before the war.
It had mountains, it had beaches, but it had an area downtown called the Gold Souk. Do you know what that was?
Yes.
Just shop after shop after shop with gold. If I knew then what I know now, I'd have mortgaged everything in sight. I would have borrowed all the money I could and gone shopping.
And gone shopping, exactly.
Because it was very reasonable gold.
It was a great country, but once the Islamists reached a point in our society where they became more than 50%, that's when we started seeing problem. The problems became aggravated with the influx of the Palestinians out of Jordan, who happened to be majority Muslims, almost all Muslims. And Lebanon was the only country to accept the 3rd wave of Palestinian refugees, where their Muslim brethren did not want to take them. But we Christians who come from Judeo-Christian culture and background, we want to do good by others. We want to take care of others. We want to love others. And that's really what tipped the scale. Once the Palestinians came in, they put their heads together with the Muslims and declared war on the Christians.
Changed everything. But so you were this young girl growing up with wonderful, loving parents who really acknowledged God in their lives. And what were you doing when some bombs hit your house? How old were you and what were you doing?
Our lives began changing by 1974, a year after you left. That's when the Muslims would set up fly-by-night checkpoints and start getting Christians out of their cars and shoot them in cold blood. And so Christians became afraid to travel. We became prisoners to our homes and our communities. By 1975, the Islamists launched their own army called Jaysh Lebanon al-Arabi, the Arabic Lebanese army. And they started massacring the Christians en masse and trying to take over Christian towns and cities as they were trying to Islamize the country. They basically wanted to create a base from which to fight Israel, kill the Jews, and throw them into the sea, using Lebanese democracy basically to topple their democracy and establish their base. My 9/11 happened to me in 1975 when Islamists blew up my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble, wounded.
How old were you then?
I was 10 years old as they shouted Allahu Akbar. I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I laid in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs in both arms, going from one surgery to another, I would ask my daddy, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because we are Christians. The Muslims consider us infidels and they want to kill us. So I learned since I was a 10-year-old little girl that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith and lived in a Christian town. We ended up leaving the hospital and coming back home. But my home was no longer the home I left. We ended up living in a bomb shelter underground in an 8-by-10 room without electricity, without water, and very little food. To get some food, we would crawl out under the bombs and dig out some dandelions and different vegetation that grew around our bomb shelter because it was the only greenery we had to eat.
Your mother made soup or something out of that, didn't she?
That's right.
You said it tasted pretty good.
That's right. I still cook dandelions in my home in America today.
maybe it's because you were so hungry, but
let's just say we have no weeds in my yard.
Yeah. She seasoned it up to where
That's right. Some garlic, some olive oil, some onions. You know, scramble it all together, and when it wilts down, put some lemon juice on the top, and you have a delicious meal.
Well, I think there was a story in there where you didn't look like there was much hope, that you were kind of blocked in there, but somehow these helpers or soldiers came and you knew they were Christians because they had crosses.
That's right.
They were in crosses.
That's right.
Boy, that must have been a sight for sore eyes.
Oh my goodness. We lived very difficult years in the bomb shelter. We were
How many years in the bomb shelter?
7 years. I lived in that bomb shelter from the age of 10 till the age of 17, robbed of my youth. And many days we would think we were going to die. I remember after going into the bomb shelter in the beginning years, my daddy would say, oh, the big Christian countries, big Christian nations are going to come see what's happening to the Christians in Lebanon and save us. Oh, America is going to come. France is going to come. Britain is going to come. Australia is going to come. And nobody came. And we went on living, crawling in ditches to get some water, under snipers' bullets, crawling to a nearby spring. I mean, it was so difficult. And 3 years into our life in the bomb shelter, I was 13 years old one time when one of our Christian militia stopped by. And he said, Brigitte, I just want you to know that we heard a lot of chatter on the radios. And we believe we're going to attack in a major attack. And he said, if I don't see you tomorrow, I wish you a merciful death. And he left. And I remember, Arthelene, dressing in my Sunday best, my Easter dress, because I wanted to look pretty when I am dead, knowing that when they come to bury me, when they come to slaughter me, there would be no one to bury me. And I remember sobbing as I begged my mother, I don't want to die. I'm only 13 years old. And there was nothing my mother can say to me. And we sat in the corner of our bomb shelter, and my parents started praying, and my father started reading from Psalms. I shall walk into the valley of death and fear no evil, for thou art with me. And my parents said to me, if they come to slaughter us tonight, we'll create a big distraction. You just run towards the Israeli border, run towards Israel, and never look back. We lived a long life. You are an only child. You're a young child. And thank God I did not have to make that decision that night, because that's the night when Israel came in physically into Lebanon and established the security zone and kicked out the Islamists away from our town and set up artillery bases around our town so we can survive, so they would not at least come in and slaughter us in the middle of the night. And that's how we ended up living until 1982 when Israel invaded Lebanon. And that's really when Israel started working with the Christians in Lebanon, trying to help the Christians take back their democracy and kick out the radical Islamic element that had taken roots of the country at that time. That's when we came out of the bomb shelter and back to rebuilding our lives. And that's when
You know,
back to life.
It's your story and you're so familiar with it, but for me to read it, I saw in this bomb shelter God preparing a young girl for what you're doing right now. Just one step, one day at a time. And I'll tell you, when I got goosebumps was when it was so serious and your dad said, we will create a distraction, you run to Israel. That just spoke, that's biblical. That's just spoke volumes to me. And that you noticed in the Israeli hospitals and so forth, how good they were to people who hated them.
Yeah, it was so moving. I mean, I was raised in a country where we were taught that, you know, the Jews are the enemy because, you know, Lebanon was an Arabic country at the time and we had a border with Israel completely closed.
Were you raised that in Lebanon, that Israel was kind of an enemy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. But not in my household. I mean, my parents were Christians, but it was just, this Israel and the Israelis, you know, our enemy. And I mean, Lebanon was involved in the 6-Day War, whatever. One plane probably we had in the, you know, in the Air Force. But it was the Jews that came to help the Christians because they understood. And because we as Christians also knew when push came to shove, when we had to fend for our lives, we knew we could run to Israel and beg for help because we had more shared values with the Jews than we had with the Muslims. We come from the same value system, the Judeo-Christian value system. So we're not taught to hate, we're taught to love, we're taught to forgive, we're taught to repair the world, to make the world a better place. And
none of that's a part of the radical Islamists.
None of that. And that's why the radical Islamists, you know, Prophet Muhammad in the Quran says, do not take the Jews and the Christians as your friends, for they are friends of each other. I mean, he knew we had nothing in common with them, and he, except in his religion, he created hatred and animosity among his people against us. And that's the difference. So, so even though in my home I was not taught to hate the Jews, but the whole society around me, especially you know, being majority Muslims, they hated the Jews.
The secular part, yeah.
Oh yeah, the Islamists, they hated the Jews.
I made some notes of things that I doubt if you've forgotten, but you don't think about them a lot. But for someone reading your book, they stood out. Your dad was so successful, and yet you saw him standing in line to get food.
Yeah.
You got lice in your hair.
Yeah.
And when you thought you were going to die, in order to stay alive, you planned, all the water was gone, but you would drink urine.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. These are the details that are in the book that people really must read the book.
Yes, they must.
I mean, when we are talking on television, you know, we just touch on the high points because we know we have limited time. But, you know, we can speak for an hour. When you read the book, like you mentioned, the details.
This is the book. This is her first book, Because They Hate, and it's very hard to lay it down. We're going to put her website up right now. We're going to leave it up for the rest of the program, and that'll give you plenty of time to write it down. You can go to her website. You can get books there. They are probably Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere.
Everything.
Everywhere.
And if they go to our website and make a donation, they'll get a book autographed from me. So, you know, that they will help us, you know, help our organization, our nonprofit, and get a book autographed at the same time.
Anybody hearing you knows you're pretty smart.
Thank you.
What happened to your education through those years?
Thank you. Great question. Great question. When the war broke out, and we went into the bomb shelter for 2 years between the age of, at 11 and 12, I didn't go to school. None of the Christian children went to school because the Muslims surrounded us to slaughter us. So we didn't get any education. And finally, our elders, because, you know, education is very important in our Judeo-Christian culture, they got together and they said, we don't know how long this war is going to go. We've got to teach the kids, these new children. So they agreed to open up the bottom floor of the school, and they would pick us up and take us to school in a tank. You know these big tanks where you see the cannon in the front? You can put 18 children in a tank. And finally, the schools reopened up, and they taught us 2 years in one. They combined. We didn't have summer break. We went to schools in the morning because usually that's when the fire stopped for a little bit in the middle of the day for a couple hours for people to go out and get whatever food, whatever they needed. I was picked up by a tank and driven to school.
Now, was this an Israeli tank, or what kind of
in
tank
Lebanon?
was it?
No, South Lebanese army. Israel helped us, gave us the tanks. So I guess, yes, it was a tank given to us by Israel. And that's how I went to school. And we would go to school, and we would study. And many days at school, as you read in the book, the siren would come on, and the principal would storm into our classrooms. Get out of here immediately. The shelling is going to begin in 15 minutes. And we would scramble out, and we would run, and I would run home. And many times the shelling would start before I made it to my bomb shelter. And I remember laying in a ditch and using my books on top of my head to catch the shrapnels as the bombs were exploding around me. And so that's how I got my education. And people ask me, well, how did you learn English?
Yeah.
And you read it in the book. We didn't have electricity, so my father, after a few years, we figured out that we can operate a black and white television on a car battery, so we can watch the news. And if there was any left at the battery, any charge left, I would watch the TV shows. And every Wednesday night, The Love Boat, and every Friday night, Dallas. And
did you figure, were there
subtitles on the bottom?
Okay.
And so if two people were talking and one person asked the other person and they said maybe, I knew that maybe meant whatever they wrote on the bottom of the screen. And I know how the sound went. So I would write it in ink on my hand, and then built up a vocabulary on my arm because we barely had water to drink, let alone shower. I ended up building a huge vocabulary. That's how I learned English. I never studied English at school.
You manage it better than a lot of people born here.
Well, you know what they say, where there is a will, where there is a will, there's a way.
Did the bomb shelter just kind of become a way of life? I mean, 7 years, it would have
absolutely.
to.
It was a way of life. I mean, we had a box that was a 7-Up box that we used as a dining room table. We had 2 bunk beds that my mommy and my daddy put wood because we had the mattress was just blown up by bombs. And so I remember they laid wood on the bottom and put a blanket on top of them, and that was our mattress. Our bathroom, as you read, was a can in the corner that we changed with a, there was no privacy. I mean, it was basic existence. We had chores. My job was to help my mommy, the lamp, the oil lamp, because the soot all night long, the gas lamp, with the filter, it would become black, and I would have to just, wipe it and clean it in the morning, and we just sat there. I did a lot of crocheting, and that's how we passed the time.
Yeah. Now, your stay in the Israeli hospital, you actually went 5 days without food. And you noticed, and you did this because someone else was there that you were taking care of, or
yes, I was taking care of somebody. I would walk around with the doctors and take care of the Lebanese wounded who were in the hospital who didn't speak English. And all these years I learned English. Watching subtitles came very handy when my mother was wounded and I was in the hospital, because I ended up translating.
Because your mom was there,
Right. My mom became wounded by a Muslim shell exploding in front of our bomb shelter.
When
Israel
wound,
invaded,
right?
a very serious wound. We ended up 22 days in the hospital. And those days really changed my life. But there were a lot of Lebanese people wounded who did not speak English. So I ended up walking with the doctors and translating to them acting as a translator between these wounded people.
Excellent.
And that's what sharpened my English. And I ran into somebody who was from the town next to us, and we got talking, and he invited me to eat. And that's when I realized there was a downstairs a cafeteria, but I didn't have any money to buy food. And finally ended up the nurse. As you remember, I told the nurse, I haven't eaten, I'm very tired, I'm starving. I was sitting on a chair next to my mommy's bed, and she put my name on the list to be served food like the patient in the morning. And
God watched over. We're really out of time, but look, friends, she's going to be on the next show tomorrow. We're going to pick up right here how God just stayed with her all the way, what she said, what she thought when she witnessed 9/11 here in the United States. So stay with us, but for right now, stay here. Got a couple things to say before we have to say goodbye.
Arthelene would like you to keep the following information handy. You may contact Homekeepers by writing P.O. Box 6922, Clearwater, Florida 33758, or go to www.rippy.org. Remember, we always enjoy hearing from our viewers, and we thank you for your support.
Okay, please remember that Brigitte will be my guest for the remainder of the week as we continue with her life, but more than that, her ministry these days as she uncovers the awful message and the consequences of radical Islam. It's really making inroads into our government, our schools, our state houses, our courts, and she is the watchman on the wall. So let me again offer you this little booklet, Understanding Islam and Christianity Made Easy. This is just some comparisons. You're not going to find stories and so forth in here, but it also gives you a way, gives you this little fold out on how to witness to a Muslim. Very important because, as I said at the top of the program, we want them all saved. But when I began Homekeepers, I first of all wanted everybody to know Jesus. I wanted them to be disciples. I wanted Jesus in their homes. And I also wanted to be very informative for the viewers. And we've done a lot of programs, you know, on your health, your finances, and education, and anything and everything that affects that family. Well, this is certainly part of that anything, because this really has such an impact when it comes to the generations that follow. So if you would just write to me at Box 6922, Clearwater, Florida 33758. Please enclose a gift, a financial gift if you can. If that's not possible, please write to us anyway, and I will send it to you. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 21, Watchman, what is left of the night? And this program is all about her being, I guess to be politically correct today, it would be a watch person on the wall. But it's very important. God has raised her up for this. I've watched her on various news outlets throughout the United States, and really no one can debate her. Because not only, you can tell she's very smart, she knows what's going on, but she's lived it. And she is here to warn you. And in the programs coming up, she will warn you about what's happening in our schools, how they're trying to get the Muslim, the Islam doctrine into our school system. And ignorance is not bliss. But I just pray that you will watch and you will be informed. And her website gives you ways that you can do something. This is what is important, and I'll talk about this on programs that follow. There is something that you can do. There's a mechanism you can just plug into, and we can change things. I believe that. But please join me next time, and I'll see you then, remembering that there's nothing higher than being a homekeeper. God bless you.
If you would like a video copy of today's Homekeepers program for just $19.95, call 1-800-229-0059 for credit card orders, or send a gift of at least $19.95 to Homekeepers, P.O. Box 6922, Clearwater, Florida 33758. Be sure to note the program number which appears on your screen.